We are committed to creating a safe and supportive space for our guests and listeners, and to provide information and tools that will help our listeners understand, manage, and overcome trauma. We understand that the healing journey can bring up challenging emotions. Therefore, we want to warn our audience that certain episodes may contain discussions or stories that could be triggering for some individuals. The content of the podcast is for educational and informative purposes only, and we encourage you to practice self-care and discretion while listening, and to reach out to a trusted support system or professional if you feel overwhelmed and need help on your healing journey. Hello and welcome back to Healing and Growing Hand in Hand podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Tickle, and our guest today is Jason Lange. And a couple of things that we're going to be talking about is, and I am excited about this conversation because I think we need more of this out there, but we're going to be talking about men's mental health. And this is really cool. So how powerful a community is in a men's group for healing and thriving in the world. So we were just having a conversation before we started recording about all of this. And so I want to welcome you, Jason. Thank you for being here today. And thank you for taking this task on because we need more of you. We definitely need more of you in this world.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Lisa. And part of honestly why I'm so inspired to take this task on, so to speak, is it's what's changed my life. So I'm trying to just give back many of the gifts that I was given and got lucky, honestly, to come across. And wouldn't be where I am in my family, in my life, in my career without the support and connection of men in the ways we're going to be talking about.
And it's so different for men. I know. I mean, I'm a woman. I know we have our challenges in connecting, but I know it's there's just such a different situation for men. And I pulled some statistics. I don't know if this is right because this is current, really. This is from 2021, but they took a survey and 50% of the men in the US report feeling lonely, as opposed to 59 for women. So they're almost even, which really surprised me.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, there's quite a few stats, that are pretty alarming when it comes to men in terms of isolation and some things we were talking about, a move to kind of work from home, the deconstruction of a lot of our social ties through different types of organizations and just places. I think about this often now, like in a way you just couldn't even 20 years ago. You could just sit in your house and order your whole life over Amazon and everything gets delivered to your door. And you can live in a life of isolation in a way that functionally was not possible in how we had to really experience the world. And I think men in particular, this is hitting everyone, men and women, but I think men in particular are very vulnerable because a lot of us are kind of conditioned out of the gate to be less relational.
Yeah.
So even in, COVID and times of isolation, my wife would have chains going, connecting with other women, relating through text or through messages, like just kind of like a breath or a heartbeat, just part of being alive. And I can tell you, going through the pandemic, there were many men I worked with that if they weren't on a call with me or one of my groups or something I was doing, they were alone. Like they didn't really have anyone in their life. And that has serious implications for our health and well-being as men on just one, the physical level, right? Some of those same research that you were drawing from, just loneliness. It can be just as serious a condition in terms of impacting our longevity as smoking a pack of cigarettes a day or being morbidly obese. Like it can actually decrease your lifespan by quite a bit. There's this other piece of research I saw that really ties into the group thing. Again, it's not specific to men's groups necessarily. We'll get into that, but just being part of a group, just being part of a group or community that meets regularly can decrease your chance of dying by up to 50% in the next year. Like it is a huge intervention to be connected in some kind of capacity. And so I focus, on men's groups in particular, but there's different ways this can show up. But I think men's groups just tend to actually hold a lot of the gifts all at once.
Yeah. God, that's frightening. That is a huge number. That is huge. Yeah.
Oh. Yeah. And, I think men as well, again, there's a lot of similarity here. There's just being human, but I think men in particular that I know of will often um, deal with their loneliness and isolation, particularly
Yeah.
turning to different kinds of addictions, be it alcohol, weed, porn and masturbation, or even just overworking,
Yeah.
something a lot of, I'm just going to keep working, never stop, keep working, never stop, uh, as a way to stay away from that emotional content. Most of
Hmm.
us men are just never trained or taught how to identify and
Right.
be with in any meaningful way that absolutely catches up to us, particularly as we age.
Well, and it makes sense that, the loneliness affects your mental health, which then will affect your physical health. That completely makes sense. It all is interconnected, so
Yeah, you can't really separate them.
no, no, no. And I know for men too, like you said, we have not raised men to show the proper emotion. The only emotion they're allowed to show is anger, right? Other than that, they're not allowed to show those emotions. And that's, I one time I had a counselor say to me, and this was, what I knew it to be true, but once he said it, it was like, wow. He said that, men and women have the same emotions. We have the
Mm-hmm.
same emotions. We feel this, we feel these emotions. It's just men aren't allowed to express all those other emotions, which
Yeah, and
I know for my own experience what that's like to withhold those emotions and what that does for me. And my dynamic is a little different than a man's.
totally. And again, this will show up in anyone, but I really do see it in men. In particular, I do live events sometimes and live retreats and workshops, and sometimes I'll come across men will come to me that are more in their like 60s or 70s
Yeah.
and are just getting to this kind of work then,
Mm-hmm.
and their bodies have often taken the shape of all they're holding,
Yep.
that all they've held their whole life, and there's misalignments and um, tightness, and
Mm-hmm.
it's pretty wild. And to see that start to relax and release is one of the great gifts of doing the work in some profound ways. And that patterning, that conditioning you just mentioned, Lisa. I didn't come up with this term, but I often use it. This man named Tony Porter and some other kind of male coaches in community organizers in the Bay back in the, I think, like late 90s, early 2000s, coined this term, the man box,
Mm.
right? Which is basically this idea that there's a narrow range, a narrow box men are expected to fit in. And if we
Yeah.
don't fit in that, we're not a man. We're not a
Yes.
real man.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can also think of it as just like a checklist. If these things are true, you're considered a man. If they're
Mm-hmm.
not true, you're not considered a man. And what's really interesting about that, to tie in some research around that, is there was this uh, kind of poll research done. I can't remember the exact person right now, but it's super fascinating. They queried both men and women. So men and women here. And they asked them just a very simple question. What denotes the transition of a girl into a woman? And what denotes the transition of a boy into a man?
Hmm.
And I'm not saying this is the right answer,
Right.
but particularly in the West, culturally, what came back from both men and women was, for a girl, her transition to womanhood came from biology. She started her menstrual cycle. Her
Mm-hmm.
body transformed. She actually became a woman in her physiology. The same did not hold true for men, where all the markers were social markers. It's how he shows up in his community. What kind of integrity does he hold? What kind of action does he take in life? What kind of responsibility does he hold? It did not have to do with physiology, meaning we can, this man box is, you can be a fully mature man in your biology, but still be considered a boy. And, I think there is some presence in our culture of this. We're seeing now of some men who have failed to launch, so to speak, are still kind of living in that more at home space, not really having a lot of agency in their life. And there's all kinds of reasons for that. But again, it just kind of points to that for manhood in particular, that there's these ideas that, for better or worse, our cultures, our religions, our families start to condition boys with from a young age. One of the most simple is don't show weakness, don't be vulnerable,
Don't cry.
don't cry, right? Many, many, many men I've worked with, heard the words, stop crying.
Mm-hmm.
You'll be fine. Just toughen up.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay. Get back at it. And, there's a healthy version of that, right? There can be.
Sure.
But that, along with, we start to hit elementary school, and there's some pretty strong research. Again, just it would happen with girls too if you put enough testosterone in them. But when you have a certain hormonal balance, your body needs to move. Like your body, there's a kinesthetic need for movement for a lot of young boys that has kind of been eradicated from mainstream schooling. And so we're already getting that message. Don't cry, be tough, then we get into school and we're told, don't move.
Yeah.
Don't move.
Sit still.
Stay still. Sit still. Don't move. Then we get into middle school. In high school, where kind of the locker room culture comes up and boys start to get very competitive. Who's maturing first? Who's having sex first? Again, you show any vulnerability, often it's actually used against you, weaponized against you. Bullying happens. So we learn, I got to play my cards super close to the chest here so I can fit in and conform. And then it continues. We get out into the workforce where, and this is changing, but traditionally, it's changed a lot in the last decades, but traditionally, war and being a soldier was the task of a man. Like, go off, do horrible things, and your body, you may not even come back. And we rewarded men for that, right?
And the trauma they went through. Holy cow.
I see it every day.
Like, that's a whole nother conversation, right?
Yes. And then just this idea that, work harder, work more, 80-hour weeks, just keep pushing. The
pressure.
Which is part of kind of our, particularly here in the States, this, always make more money kind of capitalist thing. But the point is, from all kinds of angles, men, part of what makes this man box from a young age, Lisa, is from a young age, boys and men are taught to ignore and dissociate from our bodies, which is actually where emotion starts as well. So if we're taught not to be in our body, we're also taught to not be in our heart emotionally. And not only that, are we discouraged from it, in a lot of ways, we're rewarded for it. We make more money. We're celebrated as extreme athletes that maybe will have brain damage later in our life. Whatever these different things are, we are actually encouraged and often rewarded for, he just keeps going. He's so tough. He picks himself up by the bootstraps. We're rewarded for being disembodied, which then has us disconnected from our emotions. And we get this from everywhere. So it's this pressure of always be tough, never show weakness. Other men are your competition. They are not your allies. You need to be able to always have it together, always be tough. You can just feel it.
The pressure that starts at such a young age is just amazing.
Yes.
I mean, in elementary school it starts. So they step into elementary school and they've got this pressure on them already. And they're just kids.
Yeah. Totally. And when we're young, we're just kids. It doesn't matter if you're a boy or girl, but we start getting conditioned. So point of where this leads me is a huge part of the work in the men's work movement, men's groups that I'm in right now are trying to interrupt that culture.
Good.
And say, hey, actually, you know what? We get to choose, right? What makes for a man in a sense. And rather than thinking of it as a box, I like to think of it as a certain foundation we can stand upon. And then our unique individuality comes through how whatever needs. Some men are more this way, some men are more that way. But that process of coming back in, connecting to our bodies, connecting to our emotions, particularly in a relational capacity, is where I see so many men transform. And if they don't, life really does catch up. I joke with a lot of guys. It's like, we come into the world with kind of a certain chi battery charged. There's just like an energy level in our 20s. You can just work hard. Oftentimes men are drinking hard, partying, getting up the next day. There's like a go energy.
Yeah.
The thing is, it's not sustainable. And it's usually towards early 40s and 50s where a lot of men have to suddenly pay their debts on the ways they haven't been taking care of themselves or neglecting their bodies, which in particular, like we talked about, when we're holding emotional content and we don't know what to do with it, it has a huge metabolic cost
Oh,
on the
yeah.
efficiency and energy available in our nervous system. And men will start to have lower back issues, autoimmune disorders, gut problems. Like, this stuff really shows up. And not that it can all be reduced to emotional content, but it can be deeply accelerated by that emotional content, meaning what normally might be a little tension in our body or something, or becomes even more intense because of all we're holding around it. So our body doesn't quite have the resource it needs to heal. And so, just to kind of start to tie it all together here, the place I see that transformation where men suddenly feel able to step into some different part of themselves, to feel more deeply, to release all the burden and tension they're holding on their body, that can be quite profound, is in a men's circle, is in a men's group, where all of that conditioning suddenly has the opportunity to be completely interrupted in terms of, wow, I can look another man in the eye. Wow, I can grieve. Wow, I can actually feel my fear. Wow, for some men too, I can actually feel my anger. Because even anger, which was kind of the one emotion allowed for a lot of men, a lot of guys grew up with really volatile fathers, or seeing the result of men who abused women or the environment or other people. And so they pull that inside too, the so-called nice guy, right? I just want to be friendly and safe and nice to everyone. And then they don't even have a place for their anger. And to see a man cleanly be in and express his anger, which, when I say cleanly, it means it's safe.
Yeah.
It's very different from a man being aggressive and pushing that out on other people, which is what a lot of what we see in culture. But when we see a man who's trustable, feels safe in his anger, or deep in his grief, but still feels powerful, or even in his fear, just admitting like, yeah, sometimes I don't know what to do it. I could tell you, because part of what impacted me, being around men who did that immediately transmitted something to my nervous system of, oh, there's a totally different way to be here. And nobody told me, and nobody showed me. And that, as hard as that looks a lot better than what I've been doing, because this hasn't been working.
Yeah, hasn't been working well for me at all.
Exactly. And it starts to, what I see is that me and one of my coaching partners call it the masculine vortex of what we see as each man steps in and opens up, it actually creates more permission for the other men too.
Yes.
And suddenly there's just this huge release of all kinds of vulnerabilities and fears and tensions and griefs and anger. And when men come out of that, their bodies are relaxed, their breath is deeper, there's less tension in their face, there's more vitality in their eyes, and it's like something is reclaimed that was being held inside all this stuckness previously.
Oh God, freedom, right?
Yeah.
So my question to you is, where's the bridge from getting them from the life that they're living that is just awful to actually submitting themselves to a group? I mean, that is, for women, that's a little easier, but it's still intimidating when you're walking into a group and you don't know anybody, and, you're going to be talking about vulnerable things. You're going to have to be vulnerable. For men, which, no, you're not supposed to do that at all. I mean, how do you get these men to come to the group?
Yeah. I wish I could say I had a trick for getting them to come. What I've really found is get the word out. So get the word out. Just, share what's worked for me, share what I've seen men experience, which then gets to certain people and does, sometimes get to certain men. But the honest, painful truth I've seen is it's usually not until a man is in a certain level of pain that he's like, this is so bad. I got to try something else.
Yeah.
Whether it's some illness that comes, the loss of a job, the ending or dissolution of a relationship or marriage, or for some guys that I know, just feeling so alone and isolated, having been single for so long that it's just like, I've been on like 100 first dates and I just can't create that relationship, and it hurts so much and I'm ready to give up. That it's often some kind of pain that wakes a man
Mm-hmm.
up to like, hey, something here isn't working. And if we don't change it, life's going to continue to deteriorate.
Mm-hmm.
And, I've particularly found, and one of the things I do focus on my work is relationships really are one of the areas that are just, part of my language, but one of the only areas that are so painful for men. They'll get their asses off the couch and
Yeah.
say, I need some help. I need some help here. Like
Yeah.
my wife's ready to leave me, or I just had another woman, say you're a great guy, but I just don't feel you, or whatever. It like,
Mm-hmm.
there's a certain like visceral pain to that where
Yeah.
they'll actually say like, okay, it's time for me to do something else here.
Wow. Yeah. That's what I had a feeling that was the answer, because it's not easy. And I'll be honest with you, in some cases that's happened to me. I've had to get to a certain point where I finally go, okay, but I know for men, it's not okay. I mean, who are they going to talk to? Right.
Yes.
So the scary thing when you isolate is that you get in your head too much and you start thinking too much, and then you think you're the only one, and then all this stuff that's going on in your head and all the thoughts you're having, and you think you're the only person, and which makes you isolate even more. So I know for men it's much harder for them to reach out, and so they do have to get to this point of almost brokenness.
Yeah. And what I will say is part of why I'm so lit up by doing things like this with you is men, in my experience, men tend to love podcasts.
Oh
They will
yeah.
sit there, they will listen to stuff, they will just pour over material.
Yes.
It's like kind of a safe way to start asking some questions and
Yes.
engaging and hearing some new information that out of all the different things, like even more than social media, it's like guys often come to me through podcasts where they're like, they hear me share something or speak to something, and it starts to just kind
Mm-hmm.
of get their mind running. And at some point, then they hit some kind of pain or some kind of tension, and then it's like, oh wait, there's someone I can talk to, or there's a
Right.
path, or I can Google a men's group or something, and then there's a way to like connect those two things. But that's maybe one of the most technically proficient ways I've found, is just keep getting the message out there
Yeah.
in all these channels, and so when a man is ready, he'll receive it.
Exactly. It's so true. Yeah. And yeah, they listen in silence, and it's true. And then they resonate with it. And it's the same theory. I do the podcast for trauma and childhood abuse healing is, and I
Yeah.
tell my stories. It's the same thing. I tell my stories because, and honestly, there's many times that some of these stories I've never shared with anybody. It's a little scary and a little intimidating, but the thought that goes through my head is, if this story will help someone, if they can resonate with it, if they can connect with it, and it's something that starts their healing journey, it's worth it. It's totally worth
Yeah,
it.
that's so beautiful. And I would say that's what you are intuiting there is what I've seen work for men. Like I said, that vortex. And I tell every man, every time you step in to the circle, let's say in a men's group, and reveal vulnerably, or just get honest about where you're at, even if you're angry or whatever that is, you make it easier for another man to do that.
Yeah.
And oftentimes we'll get this, right? It's like, I didn't think I could share that, but then I saw so-and-so, and he was so real and he was so honest, and I felt so connected to him at the end. I said, you know what, I'm going to go for it. And then I stepped in with my story, and I realized, yeah, wow, I'm not the only one I was just leading a retreat this weekend. And, this is the beauty of someone shares, and then you just hear the, it's like not quite that
Yeah.
exaggerated, but like
Yeah.
suddenly there's this like, oh, I'm not alone. I thought I was the only one that was so messed up in
Yes.
this way or had this experience. This is a place where we can get real and get vulnerable. And it's so transformative that your willingness to bring your stories forward, just like the men I work with, their willingness to bring their stories forward.
Mm-hmm.
It really is kind of it's like the beacon for
Mm-hmm.
people who in the right moment, they're going to see the light and have something to move towards because of those stories.
Yeah, in the group setting, like you were saying, like what that does is when one starts to share, it kind of breaks everybody else's walls down. They start kind of bringing
Yes.
their walls down a little bit. And I know that's so true. I have experienced it when I did the women's workshop. And the very first night of the workshop, each woman would share one quick story, like whatever story comes up in their head. And then they also share, how it affected them and what their beliefs were that came out of that incident. And I would literally just watch these women as, the first one was always the scariest, but really, truly, I would tell my story first because I kind of break the ice, right? So it would kind of like make it a little easier. But the first woman in the group that would share her story would be so scary, so frightening. But by the time we got around the room to the last lady, you could see the connection. You could see them relaxing. That fear that they had walking in because they didn't know what to expect is relaxing. And by the end of the night, they're exchanging numbers, so
Yeah.
there is something about that, especially when we take our thoughts and we bring them out we give it life, we give it a voice.
Yeah.
There's something about, I know for me, when I've got craziness going on in my head, and if I say it out loud, even if I'm by myself, if I just get it out there, and when you hear it, you're like, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right. So there's something really magical though about getting a group of people together and being vulnerable and sharing. And some people it takes them a little longer, and that's okay. That's okay. And my question to you too is, because this we deal on this podcast a lot with trauma and childhood abuse.
Yeah.
And of course with men, that's even a darker secret for them. Do you in this group deal with any trauma, and do you see a lot of it in this group?
Oh, too much.
I had a feeling.
I think it's just the pain. I think I've been shocked at how much sexual abuse there has been for young boys as well, and how they
breaks my heart.
really, particularly if it was instigated by a woman. There's this sense that any boy should be like grateful
I know
sexual attention from a woman, and it's like no, that developmentally, that's just not appropriate, and it has a huge impact. So I've seen that quite a bit: physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse. It's real.
What's another popular one, and I've seen this in some of the men's in my life, friends and stuff in their life, but they lost their virginity at 12, and a lot of times it was an older babysitter. And, in the younger years, they're like, oh yeah, my babysitter, but the reality is, no, that's sexual abuse, and that's trauma.
Yeah.
You're 12 years old.
Can't really be consensual at 12. Exactly. No. Even if it was pleasurable, there's still something there.
And they respond. And that's what's confusing, is they respond.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And then it becomes very confusing for them because pleasure gets linked into all kinds of other things. I've definitely seen that. And yeah, I would say just the general tendency of how much men will hold. They'll really hold these stories inside. And, I've had many, many men in circles I've done, they'll bring something forward that they've been holding for 20, 30, 40 years that they've just never told anyone. And it's been just a weight on them. And there's a fear that if I ever shared this, I'd be rejected. And it's one of those like kind of tragic things, but oftentimes one man will bring it forward, and then some other men will be like, yeah, man, something like that happened to me too. Something like that happened to me too. And again, just the community that becomes available in that is often really healing for guys to realize, there was nothing wrong with them. A lot of it was out of their control. For some men, the other thing I'll see too is they just didn't even know. We'll get them really into their bodies, and stuff will start to come forward, whether it's resurfaced memories or just their body will start reacting in a way. And it'll be, pretty disorienting at first. Like, wow, I didn't even know that was in there. And then for it to come forward is really, powerful. One of the teachers I follow around trauma, you probably know, Gabor Mate, right? He talks about there's the event itself, but the trauma actually happens in what happens after.
Correct.
So, right. So that, that I always tell these stories about, I heard this NPR interview once with people who had survived the Blitz in London in World War II. So they're in London and they're literally getting air bombed by the Germans, right? All day. And they're underground, kind of in the tube, and don't know if they're going to make it. They just do not know if they're going to make it. Every day is like, you could die. But it's pretty fascinating. For a large portion of them, they actually came out the other end of that. And as their life progressed, they missed that time the most. That was the time in their life they missed the most, because the communal sense was so strong there.
Yes.
All the class all class systems broke down, and there was just, we're in this together, we're connected, we're grateful to be alive. If we get a meal tonight, we're going to celebrate that. Not everyone had that, obviously, but a shockingly large portion of people. And they didn't necessarily carry that as a like PTSD or complex trauma later into life, because they were connected through it. And I think that's the thing that, we're talking about here, is the same event could happen to two people.
Yeah.
But one of them might have someone to hold them or debrief or to work with them on that on the other side. And yes, it's still an acutely damaging thing, but it's not as damaging as, not only does that thing happen, but then I can't talk about it in my family because dad would be mad or mom would be mad. So I have to hold it in. And that becomes the really damaging thing long term. And so, again, just having these spaces where men can bring these parts of themselves forward, I've seen, is just completely game changing for them. And some part of them gets to relax. And it's not like trauma's magically healed overnight, but it kind of ignites the system to allow things to start moving again.
Yes.
And that real healing process can start to happen once, like you said, once it's, in a sense, sometimes it's even as simple as, once it's been spoken, it starts to get lighter,
You're right.
Peter Levine style. If you speak it, it gets lighter. And a group can hold that, a really trusting, safe group can really hold that for men, and they can start to have these releases. So yeah, I do see a lot of developmental, sexual, psychological, emotional, even honestly spiritual trauma from people raised in certain religions, some of which are fine and some of which really can do a number on a young soul that it takes them a long time to unwind.
That's another area where there's a lot of deconstructing that goes on, and the whole religious trauma that goes on, that goes really deep as well. And it's really, totally. It's tough deconstructing from that one.
Yeah. Particularly because oftentimes if you're still in that culture, your family, like there's so much pressure to like stay in it. And sometimes in men's groups, one of the only places I've seen men have a space where they can talk about that kind of things, because, depending if it's like a workshop or something I lead, because it's not actually connected to our day by day, we have a little more freedom to talk about what's happening there versus, if we're going into a men's group at our church or somehow deeply connected to our spouses or community, sometimes there's a lot more negotiating we have to do. So, there's so many different kinds of men's groups and benefits of all kinds of them, but sometimes it really is powerful when it's like, wow, these group of men, they are in no way, shape or form connected to the rest of my life. So there's a type of honesty I can bring here that I don't have to worry about blowback around.
Exactly. Well, can you share with us a couple of really transformative stories of men that you've seen, that were struggling, and then I'm really curious to hear the outcome of them and just how they're doing. I would love to hear that.
Sure. There's
I'm sure you have a lot.
There's countless.
Good. That's awesome to hear. Too many to count. I love it.
Yeah. Just, there's some men I've been working with over the course of this year in a program, and, just as simple as they never trusted other men. So sometimes a men's group can be particularly confronting because it was men that damaged us.
Yeah.
Bullies or groups or social groups. And there's been a lot of men that have come through and been able to rewrite that story, to update that story to, wow, I can trust men again. I can trust other men. Not every man, but I have trustable men in my life now that I can bring anything to. We kind of joke about, having a group allows us to send out the bat signal. Like when we're in an emergency, it's just like, hey, I need something. I need some support to talk, and it'll come back. Somebody always picks up the call, and that is a game changer for guys, because maybe they've just had some kind of adverse or traumatic event, and someone to hold space for them and process them really, really can change them. I've had other guys that, sometimes they'll come in and, it's such a tender spot, but there's like, I want to be able to cry, but I just can't. Oh, yeah. I want to, and I can't. And it's often not until particularly we're in person and the space is being held, and then some contact can be made, like just some contact. So a hand on the heart or on the shoulders. And men just finally have the type of release they've maybe never had before in their life of just, I'm so fucking tired. I've been holding this for so many years. Just had to be tough, had to be tough, had to be tough. Or there was a guy, was on my retreat this weekend that was we were doing some pretty deep breath work. And I could tell that he was just from a family system where expression is not allowed, just not allowed. And I was like, ooh, I get a sense something's in there. And, I tried to give him some guidance while he was breathing and it wasn't quite happening. And then I came over later and I just got really close to him and I burst into tears. I just started wailing, just like burst into tears because I could just feel how much this dear soul was holding. And when he saw me burst into tears, he finally had a release. He was the fact that someone gave a shit and was feeling him, like opened him, and he started to have, a pretty big release in a pretty profound way. And so, other guys that just, on the other end, find their power, like literally find their capacity to set a boundary and say no. And they never knew they had that in them. And just no. It's not aggressive. It's not mean. Just no, I'm not okay with you talking to me like that. If, I'm going to walk away if this continues. And the level of agency and empowerment that comes back online in men when they can do that is so incredible to witness, just so incredible to witness. And, like another man who had been holding something since, he was 16, he was in his 50s, and just the deepest thing that he thought no one would ever be okay with. And he brought it out, and just the life force that came back into this man of just how much energy was there holding it, when you have to keep secrets like that. It's an active process, which people don't realize. It's not like, oh, you just forget about it. You're constantly tracking, what can I share? How do I share it?
Yeah.
How do I withhold this? How do I keep it closed in my body?
And watching everybody closely and
yeah, it's profound. So just, seeing men open, come into their power, learn to grieve, learn to trust other men, to be able to magnetize a relationship that they want, it really can change things. So there's another guy I was working with recently, and he comes from Eastern Europe and just has, one of those wildly efficient work ethics. Like this guy just gives so much to his organization. He works his ass off. And through being in a group, we were talking a lot about nourishment and our need to relax, and we can't always be in go as men, and we have to restore ourselves. And he did something, might sound so simple to some people, but he asked for 10 days off to go back to Bulgaria and connect with the friends he grew up with and take the first vacation of his life.
Wow.
And they totally gave it to him. And he went out and had a fabulous time, but he never would have even asked for it. Like his whole life, he just wouldn't even ask for it because he didn't think it was okay, or, he was afraid he'd lose his job. And that's a man who tuned into this. Well, this is what I want. And so I have nothing to lose asking for it, right? They're either going to say yes or they're going to say no. And if they say no, I'm going to have to seriously consider, is this a job I want to stay in if they don't support people being, having lives and restoring? But he got it. And, it was like one of those wins that in some sense was small, but to him was a revolution for how he's going to be able to live his life and take care of himself.
Oh, and just what that did for him to actually go and do that, to first of all, ask for that time off and get it, but then to go spend that time. Because I know when I spend time with my family, I get rejuvenated. I get a lot of energy from it. I really enjoy it. So that had to be a huge eye opener for him. I can't even imagine.
Yeah, it's been so great he sent a whole bunch of photos, and man, it was just like, it created more love and joy in the world. And I guarantee he went back to work and probably was even able to give even more.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Because he was restored, right?
Yeah. Very different man. I mean, that's amazing. So on the trust, I want to go back to the trust, the struggle that men have. Do you find that is common, that a lot of men don't trust other men? Is that a common thing?
Yeah, I would say most men I work with, unless they've engaged with this work early on, come in with layers of protection and defense on. right?
Now, some of
There's
it
an
could
actual armoring up of
yeah,
like,
yeah,
okay, I can't trust these guys. What happens if I share my truth? Like, are they going to make fun of me? Are they going to reject me? Are they going to
yeah.
kick me out? Like there's a lot of armoring that's up. And it's not like I make them walk in first day and say, hey, reveal everything. But there's a
Spill everything.
process, right?
Yeah.
There's an actual process of building trust and rapport and some structures and practices and the various programs I do with guys that facilitate that in a sense, in that, I think to some extent, guys can sometimes feel it when they're working with me because I have that with men in my life. And so a lot of my stories flow out from there.
Yeah.
I'm just like, yeah, no, this is what I do. I don't make clients do anything I'm not doing in my own healing or, experience in a sense. And so sometimes just seeing the rapport I've built with other people or welcoming, just welcoming and even welcoming guys in and letting them know it's totally okay for you to be skeptical or doubting or mistrusting right now.
Yeah.
There's
Expect
a whole
it.
reason. Yep. That had to exist in your nervous system to survive in the world. And so I'm not asking you to override that yet. Just notice it and stay open, come to this with a beginner's mind and let's see what happens. And it's pretty powerful. It's pretty potent. I just took 24 guys on an experience this weekend and
wow,
many of them, came out with a completely different relationship to themselves and men in a way that they didn't even know was possible. And it's, it's we have a little WhatsApp group and it's just like on fire, just guys chatting and sharing and revealing. And
God,
it's just like, once they're given a space, once men are given a space, we got a lot to say. We got a lot to share.
I love it.
We just need to know it's safe. And then suddenly it's just like the dam bursts and just...
And let the men have a voice too.
Exactly.
Let them have a voice.
Totally.
Don't shut them down.
Yeah, exactly. You have a voice. Your pain matters. We see you, and you don't have to do it alone. I think that was a big theme of this weekend for a lot of our guys. Is what life's plenty hard. There's always going to be tons of stressors coming at you, and I guarantee you, you don't have to do it alone. And as I tell my guys, it's not that life magically gets better or easier, but it gets better. It's like the same stressor comes at you, but when you have connection, you're more resilient.
Yes.
Right. One of my friends says community is immunity. Ooh. Like it builds up resilience in our immune system. Right. And when we're isolated, we have less resilience. We have less immunity.
Yes.
Things stick to us more and hurt us more. But when we have that support system around us, this is where I tell guys, men's group can be emotional. It can be cathartic. It can be release. And the most badass men I know who are doing the most in the world, they have these support systems around them. They are not doing it alone. And you will become more efficient, more trustable. You will make more money. I mean, it is like across the board, the transformations I start to see with men as they build this kind of nervous system around them of other healthy, trustable, safe men is in a sense where it makes it safer to take bigger risks. Because then if we fail, it's just feedback and we have something to catch us. And so many men have never had that support system under them. So every move has to be overanalyzed, calculated, and takes so much energy.
And God forbid you fail. Right?
Exactly.
God forbid you fail.
And then there's so much shame there. Whereas, in the culture we try to create, it's like, there's no failure. There's just feedback.
Right.
Like, what'd you learn?
Exactly.
What do you want to do better next time? How can we help you figure that out? We all have stories of falling on our face and, we'll share those sometimes. Like, I went on this date, I did this. And it was just like such a relief when everyone realizes, oh, all the men I thought had figured it out, they've messed up just as much as me.
They're goofballs just like me.
Exactly.
They're goofballs just like me.
So liberating for men when they realize that, because I think often, accentuated in these social media days, there's this sense, oh, that man's got it all figured out, perfect wife, perfect job. And we make up these stories and compare ourselves to them.
Yeah.
And it's so fun to see the bubble burst when these men, come in and it was great. We had this guy this weekend. He's like a kind of shorter, stout bodybuilder, just rock solid dude, like really tough on the outside. And he saw this other guy who was like 6'4", 6'5", and thought, wow, that man is like powerful. And the taller guy just had been in the work a little bit more and immediately went into like revealing some vulnerability and emotional content. And it just like, this guy's brain did not know how to compute. He's like, oh, I thought this guy was going to be so tough because he's so tall. And the other men were having that experience of this guy because he was just built like a rock, works out all the time. They're like, wow, you're so tough. You got it together. Turns out inside, he was just as scared as everyone else, just like every other man when they come into the retreat. And I say, anyone else feel scared coming in here? When you see all the hands go up, it's like, oh, hey, that's different. We don't have to pretend.
Yeah,
There's always
exactly.
that just relief.
I know. I just imagine the weight that's lifted off of you when you get into that place when all this stuff is lifted off of you and you don't have to have this facade anymore and you can just finally find who you really are and be who you really are. Yeah, I mean, exactly. I can kind of relate to that on my end because that was something that I did in my healing journey. I'm still on that journey of certainly healing, but also figuring out who I am and what I like and what I don't like and what's okay and what's, because for so many years, I did what I thought you wanted me to do. And so I had no idea what it is I like. So I can completely relate to that. And when I finally realized that I didn't know that I didn't have that, I didn't know who I was or what my identity was. And I started, it was this big relief. It's like, oh, okay. And my husband, at the time we were dating, he's like, let's find out who you are. And so we've been on this journey and it's really been cool. And so once you get that permission, you give yourself that permission, it's an amazing life to find out. And you'll stumble and you'll mess up and it's okay. It's okay.
Yeah, totally. I love that. I can feel the energy in that. Just that. Yeah, there's like a freedom to explore. And,
be curious.
Not be perfect, not do it right, and discover our authenticity, as human beings, let alone just men. And it's so liberating to see men step into that and be like, wow, okay, I get to kind of create the culture I want around me by how I choose to show up in my life and who I choose to have around me, who I choose to be in relationship with.
It's interesting because what just came to me is, the old way that these men are living is actually powerless, right? And so by going into these, these groups and doing this healing and doing this work, they become powerful. They become the powerful men that they were originally supposed to be, that, they were really created to be, but all this crap came up and confused them and sent them in a different direction. And now they get to find out who that powerful man really is and be that powerful man. It's just different.
Yeah, exactly.
It's healthy.
Totally. Such a big fan of that.
I know, I am too. I love it. We definitely need more of that. I'm so for it. So tell us a little more about the groups and, what you offer to men, because I think there's more than just group coaching and that.
Yeah, I'm a men's guide and facilitator of groups, and so I do some one-on-one work with guys and coaching kind of relationships. But I will tell you, my sweet spot, my favorite place to be is in a group, just because of all the reasons we've talked about, how fast I see it can open a man up to a different way of being. That sometimes it's hard for me. This is another example I was talking about with my guys this weekend, and they get to feel it. Oftentimes our self-image, so our image of ourselves, is the last thing to update in life. So we're like doing all this work, we're changing, maybe it's physically, maybe it's emotionally, and yet our story about ourselves is often a little behind, right? And so, I've had guys come in, they've been working out, they lose like 300 pounds and, they look in the mirror and they still see those 300 pounds. Like I'm not where I want to be. I'm still unhealthy or whatever that might be. And the power of a group I've seen is other people can reflect to us where we're actually at. And so a lot of men will have a story about who they are, and then they'll start getting reflections from other men. And I've had this happen in group, Lisa, where it's the moment of, okay, right now, either 8 other people are bullshitting me, or my idea of myself isn't right.
Yeah.
Which one?
Yeah.
And then talk about the trust. There's, wow, I'm going to trust that how these men see me right now is actually probably more accurate than my story about myself. And the transformation in a group like that is so potent. And then you mix that in with that vulnerability that I talked about, which creates the masculine vortex of permission to bring forward their full selves. And Then you sprinkle on top of that the power of celebrations and wins. As a man shares, like, I just had a guy came out of my group, and he had a moment, right, with his wife where, something was happening. He was feeling some tension inside that he normally would have kept hidden. She would have asked him, and he'd be like, no, I'm fine. And, he's hot off the retreat, so a lot going. And he's like, I'm going to try something different here. And he got honest, and he's like, I heard this when you said that, and it made me feel really sad and insecure. And it totally softened his partner. And they had a profoundly deep connection come from that, because she felt closer to him.
Yep.
And he revealed a part of himself. And then he felt closer to her because he wasn't holding this insecurity anymore.
That wall came down.
And he shared that win into our group. And then all these other men hear that, and they're like, fuck, I want to go do that too. And they go out and have these experiences. And it creates this, one man in one of my men's groups calls it the sunshine effect. Yeah. It's just like one man starts shining his light, and then other men have the opportunity to kind of reflect and shine their own. And it's an actual vibration that'll go through the group, in pretty profound ways. So point being, I love working in groups, and I primarily do that a couple different ways. I have one group that is just online. It's kind of a combination of a men's group, coaching, and a course that is, particularly because of why we were talking about dating and relationships for men who are married or men who are dating, who aren't having the types of experiences they want with their partner or their future partner. And it's a way to take their power back, in a sense, and discover what it is they need to transform inside themselves to just feel even better about how they're showing up in the world. And that's really powerful for all the reasons we've talked about.
Yeah.
And that's just online. So guys can do that from wherever. Then I have one that's kind of a hybrid of a virtual program and a retreat. That's a specific kind of 9-week men's group all about shadow work. That's where we get together and we really go into those deep, wounded, traumatic, or unconscious parts of ourselves of, I don't know why I keep doing, one of the signs of shadow. Why do I keep doing this thing over and over and over, even though I don't want to? There's often some kind of piece of ourselves or our hurt or in the shadow. And so I do that program, and that, warms guys up with a little virtual connection. So they start building that trust with each other, get to know each other a little bit. And then we do the live retreat. So by the time we get there, we don't have to spend half the time kind of building that foundation of trust. It's kind of there, and we just get to go super deep in 3.5 days. And then I have what I just wrapped is my Labor Day retreat, which is just a one-off kind of 3.5 day experience in Northern California, where we do a lot of embodiment practice, a lot of sharing, a lot of getting real, and a lot of bonding and creating brotherhood outdoors in some beautiful locations. And just probably if you want to jump into the deep end of the pool, that's definitely the way to go, because you get the full experience there. And then guys will often do another program on the tail end of that.
Yeah.
And more things that I'll be creating in the next year around how to start your own men's group. I have a couples program coming out with my wife. And, but those are the main ways I'm offering work with the guys right now. And what I would also say is, regardless of whether you don't want to work with me, I love it when guys reach out, because I can help resource you to find a group. If you're like, I really want something in person, how do I find it? I can kind of start to guide you on what you want to look for, how you find that, things I might know in your area. To me, the passion is just getting men connected. My mission is every man should be in a men's group, and it doesn't have to be with me. There's plenty of other amazing human beings out there leading this stuff, and I can't lead every group. So if nothing else, I'll try to plug you in, or point you in a direction that'll give you something to try out for men listening.
Oh, that's beautiful. And so how would they reach? How could they? Let me talk. How could they reach out to you? There we go. How could they reach you?
Yeah. Best way to kind of keep up with me, contact me, is go to my website, which is evolutionary.men. So it's not .com, it's actually .men. You'll find a contact form on there if you need any support or just have some questions. You can book a free call with me if you want to hear a little bit more what I'm up to. And then I have my own podcast, so there's tons of just this kind of content for men if you're just wanting to get a taste. And,
what is the name of your podcast?
Same thing as the website. So just Evolutionary Men.
Okay. Excellent. Well, I have one last question for you. What would you like to leave our listeners with?
Yeah, I would say this thing I've noticed that I think particularly men, and I've fallen prey to it too. So let me just out myself here of, often there's something we want to do or create or a way we want to be in the world. And we'll set a goal. Like this is the thing I want to do. And then it won't happen. And in it not happening or us giving up or getting discouraged, it feeds this narrative of I'm no good or I'm broken or I can't do anything. So it actually starts to reinforce some of our beliefs about ourselves. Mm-hmm. And just what I want to leave with, what I've seen time and time again with men, is where we often want to go to is we want to spring right to the plan, to the action, to the how do I solve this, right?
Yeah.
And what's possible in a group is to do what's before that, which is, first off, how about you get co-regulated, you feel safe, you start to nourish yourself as a man to come out of fight and flight, or freeze, which so many men are, mm-hmm. and just come to a ground of like wellness in the moment. And from there, we get to create from a totally different way, like I was talking about, where we have this sense of something to catch me underneath. So not everything is life or death. It's, I get to try this. I get to run this experiment. I get to run this experiment and try this. And it's just a step I keep seeing over and over again men want to not do. Like, you could call it self-care in a sense, which in this sense would be self-care and getting connected to community so you don't feel so alone and feel so isolated. And that shift, when men have that, it's just profound what I've seen them then step into in their life, not out of a place of not being enough, but a place of I'm going to be okay no matter what. Mm-hmm. And it's like you said, it's a completely different kind of power that men can then move way men can move through the world with that power in hand of like, wow, I can take chances now because I have community. I have something to catch me underneath. And, I'm not killing myself in the process, quite simply. So whatever it is, whether it's a men's group, a retreat, a workshop, yoga, trauma work, psychotherapy, coaching, like you want to start dealing with that stuff now, guys. And I tell you, it's going to make it so much better on the other side.
Yes. And again, thank you so much for doing this work. It is so greatly needed. And I've actually had a couple of guests on that do this type of work, and it's just not enough, and it's so greatly needed. And so that's why, like I said, I was excited about having you on here because this word does need to get out, and we do need to give a safe place for men. Because as I'm listening to you, I'm just thinking it's got to be so frightening not to have that. Totally. And it starts at such a young age, right? That it just becomes a part of you. And then when you finally get permission to let go, I would imagine it's just got to be huge because you've just dealt a lifetime of carrying this fear and burden on you. And you now don't have to carry it anymore. I just can't imagine the release that gives them. So I'm glad. I thank you for giving these men a safe space to do that and be the men that they were created to be.
Yeah, beautiful. Love that expression. And thank you for giving space for me to put it out there and for men to, have a way in to what it takes to heal.
Absolutely. I will definitely have more of these on because it's so important because men, especially in the trauma arena too, it seems like it gets more focused on women because women are more willing to step up. Yep. But I want it open to everybody. Men need to heal too. They deserve to heal. So thank you.